January 14th. And could I have the roll call, Clerk Gorham?
Absolutely. I am here. Member Kirby. Here. Member Loeffler-Kemp. Chair Loeffler-Kemp. Member Lofall. Member Oswald. Here. Member Sandstead. Here. Member Trinka. Here. Superintendent Gronsack. Here. Assistant Superintendent Horton. Present. Deputy Clerk Erickson. Excused.
Okay, great.
Secretary Dollance. Secretary Tebow. And our student representatives are excused.
Okay, well, we have a quorum, and when Member Lofold comes, we can add her. So I have a statement to read before our closed session. So the Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Minnesota Statutes, Section 13D-05, Subdivision 3B, allows the school board to close the meeting to engage in attorney-client privilege discussions. The district has been sued in state court in the case of Johnson versus ISD 709, court file number 69DU CV 18-2260. The board seeks to meet with its attorney to discuss the status and possible resolution of this case. It would be detrimental to the district's interest for the board to hold a public discussion with its attorney where any adverse party or their attorney could listen to or be made aware of the attorney's advice related to the litigation. It is in the district's best interest for the board to obtain legal advice in a confidential setting to maintain the attorney-client privilege. Accordingly, I will hereby entertain a motion that this meeting be closed pursuant to the attorney-client privilege for the reasons cited. So moved. Okay. Seconded by, moved by Member Sandstead, seconded by Member Trinka. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. We'll recess into closed session. Thank you.
if it works.
Well, we're going to reconvene our special session, and we are now going to consider approval of a settlement agreement based on our discussions that we had in closed session, and I'm going to call on our attorney, Trevor Helmers, to give us some background information. Thank you, Trevor.
Yes, thank you. So what I'm bringing for you for approval tonight is a settlement agreement and release of all claims in the case of Art Johnston versus Independent School District 709, Duluth. This is a case that has been going on for several months now surrounding data requests. And initially I would point out that these types of data requests can be very difficult and onerous for school districts to respond to. In this case in particular, there were roughly 300,000 discrete pages of documents that were requested that take an extremely long time to gather and then wade through. And this is something that can be a huge expense and difficulty not only for your administrative staff to be able to pull and review the documents, but also quite often require legal counsel to review as well because of all of the myriad laws that come into play when you're talking about data that are maintained and privacy rights of that data. So setting that aside, the difficulty and the spending and district time that's taken in these, this litigation was about some of those data responses, and we have been going forward with that. And at this point, this case and the defense of this case have been covered by your insurance company. Your insurance company has asked me to bring you essentially this settlement agreement in which they are putting forward the funds. And the reason why they're putting forward the funds is because they've done a cost-benefit analysis and said, when I look at how much time and expense is going to go into the defense of this litigation, if we can get rid of it early for a relatively small amount, we will. And so that is what I have brought to you tonight. Your insurance company has approved this settlement agreement and settlement payment, and they are asking for the board to approve it tonight. A couple of the things to remember. First of all, this isn't money that's coming from the district. This is coming straight from your insurance company. They'll be the ones that are cutting the check. There won't be anything further for the district to do after approving this. The settlement payment that they have authorized and they would make directly to the plaintiff would be $55,000. There would be no further claim to compensation, no attorney's fees, anything like that. That's a total amount of the settlement all in. In exchange for that, what you as a district would get would be dismissal of this lawsuit. This lawsuit goes away and can never come back. You would get a release of claims regarding any of the issues that are at issue in this litigation as well, meaning that you can't turn around and be faced with these same issues in court next week, next month, next year. It's a final, it's all done. You are not admitting any wrongdoing. You are expressly saying that you deny any wrongdoing and that the reason why you are settling this is in compromise of disputed claims. And you are also getting the benefit of making sure that these same parties aren't involved in any future data fights or data requests by terms of the contract as well, and that there should be no further disputes regarding additional data requests or any previous data requests. At this point, I would say that my recommendation to you as a board is to approve this settlement agreement. I am in agreement with your insurance company saying that at this point in time, this is a good time to settle the case for a fair amount based on the lawsuit and based on the time and expense that we would have to expend to continue with the lawsuit, not just the time and expense of legal fees, but also the administrative time that would be pulled out of your normal and regular job duties to have your administrators and staff continue to work on this litigation. At this point in time, I think this settlement agreement is fair, makes sense, and again, I can't stress enough that this is payment that's coming from your insurance company, not from the district, and the benefit you get of being done with the data requests at this point in time. So with that, I would say that I would recommend that the board consider this settlement agreement and approve it tonight.
I make a motion to accept the settlement agreement.
Okay, thank you. Member Oswald, just again, thank you, Attorney Trevor, for your expertise and guidance and time and guidance to us. So we're doing an approval of the settlement. We've had a motion by Member Oswald. Do I have a second? Okay, seconded by Member Kirby. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor of approving the settlement, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries 7-0 to approve the settlement.
I move to adjourn.
Okay. Member Sandsted moves to adjourn, seconded by Senator Trinka. All in favor? Or Senator Trinka, sorry. Woo, yeah. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so
We're going to
moved.
start our education committee meeting down there right now.
Thank you.
And I know that some board members will not join us right away because they have to sign some things, so.
What is
but we'll
Okay.
get going.
here?
Thank you.
There's something. Joe, what did you put? Is this like a trick? Did you put
My legs never went up that high. Thank you, Trevor. I sit low. Yeah, thanks, Trevor.
something under here that's making my pants dirty?